used to think there was nothing more ordinary than the overnight shift at a suburban self-storage place. It's the kind of job people forget exists. Just a lonely office with rows of corrugated metal doors stretching off into the dark, motion-activated lights blinking on whenever some raccoon or late-night customer wanders by. I took the gig because the pay was decent, and I figured the hours would suit me, quiet, solitary, no one to bother me after midnight. But sometimes, I wonder if I would have noticed what was wrong if it had been busier that night. Sometimes I wish I hadn't noticed at all. The night started off as usual. I clocked in at 10 p.m. and settled behind the plexiglass window, humming along to the tinny radio and sipping stale coffee from the break room. Outside, the rows of units glowed bluish under the security lights, casting skewed shadows that jittered whenever the wind nudged the chain-link fencing. A light rain tapped at the roof, more soothing than threatening, and I watched the drops slide down the glass, blurring the outlines of everything beyond the gate. It wasn't until sometime after midnight that I noticed the first off thing. A subtle detail that, on any other night, I probably would have shrugged off. I was doing my routine patrol through the corridors of units, flashlight in hand, the beam jittering across dull padlocks and scratched-up numbers. Every few minutes, one of the motion lights would flicker on ahead of me, and I'd get that unpleasant feeling of being anticipated, like someone knew where I was going before I did. I tried to chalk it up to nerves. There's something about those endless lines of doors, each one concealing someone else's private world, that can make you feel watched, even when you're alone. Halfway down the C row, I stopped short. A thin line of water snaked out from under one of the doors, pooling across the concrete. Unit 17. I frowned, assuming someone's boxed-up belongings had sprung a leak. I listened, expecting to hear the drip-drip of water or the distant hum of a dehumidifier. But there was only silence and that faint electrical buzz from the overhead lights. I shone my flashlight at the padlock. It was still secured, but there was something odd. A faint print, maybe a handprint, smudged into the dust on the corrugated metal just beside the lock. It looked fresh, as if someone had touched the door only moments before. That was the first thing. It shouldn't have rattled me like it did, but I felt the hairs on my arms prickle, my grip tightening on the flashlight. I took a photo for the records, made a note in the logbook, and tried to shake it off. Just condensation, I told myself. Maybe a customer came by earlier, and I missed them on the cameras. Still, as I turned away, I had the uneasy sense that something in the unit was listening, that if I pressed my ear to the metal I'd hear more than the hum of the lights. Back in the office, the radio had gone to static, a thin, whining hiss that set my teeth on edge. I fiddled with the dial, but every station had vanished, replaced by that same, bone-dry crackle. I switched it off. The silence felt thick, oppressive, as if the whole building was holding its breath. I checked the security feeds. Nothing out of place, just empty hallways and the occasional flicker of a moth against the camera lens. I tried to distract myself with paperwork, but my mind kept drifting back to 17. I told myself I'd check it again on my next patrol, maybe call the renter in the morning. But as the hours dragged on, that sense of being watched intensified. I kept glancing at the window and catching my own reflection, half expecting to see someone standing behind me in the little pool of fluorescent light. The rain outside had picked up, drumming louder, masking the usual distant hum of the highway and sharpening every other noise inside the facility. It was like the world had shrunk to just me, the storage units, and whatever was hidden behind those metal doors. At 2:07 a.m., the silence broke. A sharp metallic clang echoed from somewhere out in the rows, like someone had dropped a heavy chain or slammed their palm against a unit. I froze, pulse hammering in my throat. I waited, listening, but the rain swallowed any other sound. I told myself a raccoon might have knocked something over, or maybe a branch had blown against the fence. Still, I grabbed my flashlight and keys and stepped outside, locking the office behind me. The air was cold and wet, tasting faintly of rust. The rain had let up a little, but the ground was slick under my shoes. As I moved between the rows, my breath came out in quick, visible bursts. Every step made the gravel crunch too loudly, making me feel exposed. 17 was only a few units down, and as I approached, I caught a whiff of something strange, a metallic tang, sharp and unfamiliar, cutting through the usual damp cardboard smell. I shone my flashlight over the units, half scanning for movement, half expecting to catch a glimpse of something slipping between the pools of light. When I reached 17, I crouched to inspect the puddle. It had spread further, the water looking oddly dark at the edges. The handprint on the door was gone now. The padlock glinted dully, unmoved. I scanned the ground for footprints, but found nothing but my own. I stood up, heart racing, and knocked on the metal. Partly out of protocol, partly to convince myself there was nothing in there but some soggy furniture. No response. Not even the muffled shifting of boxes that you sometimes get when things settle. I tried to peer through the small ventilation slit at the top, but the interior was pitch black. My flashlight beam barely penetrated, but for a split second, I thought I saw, felt, a movement, like something inside had shifted just out of sight. I stepped back, the skin prickling on the back of my neck, and told myself again that it was probably nothing. Maybe the leak had caused boxes to fall. I'd log it, call maintenance in the morning, and that would be that. On my way back, I noticed something that made me stop cold. Down at the end of the corridor, one of the motion-activated lights flickered on, though I hadn't seen anything move. I waited, holding my breath, but nothing came into view. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that something was standing just beyond the reach of the light, watching me. I forced myself to return to the office, locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I wrote another note in the logbook, trying to keep my handwriting neat. For a few minutes, I sat in the stiff plastic chair, listening to the building creak and settle, telling myself that if I just made it to dawn, everything would make sense. The security monitors blinked in the corner. I tried to focus on the screens, my eyes darting from one to the next. Hallways empty. Parking lot deserted. But then, on the monitor showing C-row, I noticed something that didn't fit. The faint outline of a figure, right in front of 17. Not moving, just standing there, blurry at the edges, like a smudge on the lens. I stared, willing it to resolve into something ordinary. Maybe a trick of the light, a reflection, a spider web. I leaned closer. The figure didn't move. I looked up through the office window toward the rows outside, but all I could see was the rain glinting under the security lamps and a long corridor of closed, silent doors. Nothing stood in front of 17. Not that I could see. My skin prickled, the kind of crawling sensation you get when you realize you're not alone. The logical part of my mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe a moth too close to the camera, a glitch in the feed. I cycled through the other angles, back and forth, but C-row's camera kept showing that vague human shape, standing stock still in front of 17. And then, just as I convinced myself to call it a trick of the monitor, the smudge turned. No movement, no real body, but the blurry outline seemed to shift, to face directly toward the camera, toward me. My mouth had gone dry. I fumbled with the walkie-talkie, wanting to radio the off-site supervisor, but my hand slipped and it clattered to the floor, skittering under the desk. I ducked down, heart hammering, and for the first time all night, I wanted to be anywhere but here. When I got back up, the figure was gone from the monitor. The hallway was empty again. The only sign that anything had changed was the wider puddle spilling out from under 17's door. I scanned between the live feed and the window, desperate for some sign of ordinary life. A car's headlights, a neighbor's porch light, anything. Instead, every monitor suddenly flickered. Static washed over all 8 feeds, lines scrolling upward like the cameras were trying to shake off a bad dream. Through the static, shapes began to twitch and slide, blurring the grid until, for a heartbeat, every single camera showed a different row, but the same outline, a figure standing just out of reach of the nearest unit's light. always where the shadows were deepest, always facing the lens. The static cleared. All was as before. But now, in the hush, I heard a new sound. A slow, deliberate tap tap tap, coming not from the monitors, but from somewhere out in the real world, echoing down the concrete corridors. I pressed my ear to the glass. The tapping repeated, methodical, like knuckles rapping on metal, then moving on to the next door, and the next. Always heading closer row by row. I backed away from the window, grabbing my phone and keys, mind racing through options. Do I call the police? What do I even say? There's something tapping on the units? I tried to dial out, but the signal was gone, replaced by that same dry, hissing static from the radio earlier. Every device, my phone, the walkie, even the landline, was dead or buzzed with interference. The lights flickered overhead, casting the office into alternating bands of shadow and sickly fluorescence. I watched the monitors, unable to look away. The C-row feed stuttered, then steadied, and the corridor outside 17 was empty once again. But now, water was seeping from under several doors, snaking across the concrete in dark, branching patterns. My mind latched onto mundane explanations: plumbing failure, a burst pipe, maybe severe weather. But I knew none of it explained the handprint, the figure, or that feeling, stronger every second, that I was being drawn out of the office. The tapping had stopped. In its place, a new sound, the faint scrape of metal, like a key turning in a lock, but slower. I looked at the monitors. Nothing moved. Still, the urge to check, to see for myself if the doors were still closed, gnawed at me until I couldn't resist. I slipped from the office, locking the door behind me as if a thin layer.